Hello, welcome back again. Today I wanted to talk a little bit more about character creation, specifically a method that I've used for my recent characters to where I've actually been pretty happy with how they turned out. And it's more of a constructive method than just like the vague abstract, you focus on backstory and personality. It's more of a constructive way of doing it. I would add to this that there are sort of like templates you can fill out. I hope the rain is not too distracting, but it might add to the ASMR vibe. Who knows? There's a lot of templates online that have questionnaires, kind of like just fill in questions to help you create the characters. Those are great. I would always add those as an extra. It's one of the good things about 5e. I don't personally, 5e is not my favorite system, but it's good for what it does. And that's one of the things 5e does. It adds a really nice thing to that. But on top of those, or perhaps even before those, when creating a character, I would consider the three primary loops, the primary, secondary, and tertiary loops. I suppose it's not the three primary, but the three loops. So the primary loop, what does your character do in an immediate sense, as in within a couple of seconds, like in a second by second loop? This is to say personality. How do they act? How do they speak? High tone, low tone, accent. Are they nervous? Are they more confident, introverted, extroverted? Focusing on the very moment to moment. We're not focusing on more than that. We're not focusing on morals or anything like that. Just try to separate that and try to figure out just how you imagine them. It's even easier if you do it, imagine a scene, and oftentimes, and this is something we'll come back to in a few minutes, oftentimes people make the mistake of imagining their character doing something alone when, well, you very rarely are alone in an RPG with a group. Not to say you're never alone, but for the most part you are in a group with other people. But onto the secondary loop. How does your character solve problems? This might be bigger for some groups and some players, but I think this doesn't just mean combat, it doesn't just mean mechanics, it means method of solving problems. I mean, real life people are different ways of solving problems. Constructive, are they more brute force? Are they more direct? How do they handle people? How exactly do they solve problems? And this ties into morals and actions, and more to the point, a 15-minute by 15-minute loop, I would say. But obviously, it would be more than that. It's not an exact science, obviously, but that's how you differentiate the first and the second loop. The tertiary loop is probably, as you'd expect, what does your character want to do? Overarching story, overarching goals. And this is very important to speak to your GM about, because it's very important that you keep it within a scope of the game. Some games do not have a gigantic scope. So having some kind of world-changing goal might not fit the campaign. All of these are important to mesh with the GM, but I think the tertiary loop in particular, it's very important to check that your goals are sort of within the parameters of the game. The Death and Taxes campaign, I think I was pretty ambitious with Gideon's goals. So far, it's been actually pretty great, really additive to the game, and he was created with this primary, secondary, tertiary method, and it's just been working out really well, the characters I've created with this, because it helps you get a good foundation for how you're going to do it. Now, onto the mistakes I did. I always do the mistake of imagining my character alone, because obviously you don't know the group. You don't know what kind of group you're going to have, so you imagine, how does your character act alone? How does your character solve problems alone? What does your character want to do alone? And like personality, morals, it's often in a vacuum, and all the scenes you imagine them being in are often with either faceless companions or no companions at all. which is a mistake, and that's perhaps something I personally need to work on, perhaps something you need to work on less, but it's person to person. But remember that these goals, these personalities, primary, secondary, tertiary, should always be able to function in a group dynamic. It's quite important, because otherwise you'll have a situation where you can have some interesting situations where your goals might not align with the other players'. I don't want to say alignment, because honestly, who cares about alignment at this point? Whether you're playing D&D or not, it's just an extra thing. Like it's fine. Unfortunately, it's not just an extra thing, because some of it is actually tied into mechanics to the point where you are a different character, meta-wise, based on your alignment, which I personally am not a huge fan of. But hey, that's the game. We all decided to still play D&D and Pathfinder in current year, so this is what we gotta suffer with. There's nothing wrong with D&D and Pathfinder, but if you're playing superhero games in D&D, you might want to consider doing another system, because there are better systems for that. But bottom line on that tangent, play what you like, of course. That's the end goal, to have fun with it. But that's a good base for the character. This gives you good structure of how to actually use them. Now, this will change in game. You will never have an exact character as you go in, and that will stay that way as you continue to play. Because backstory might not change as you play, but personality will. It will never be the same way the first session as the 10th session. It just won't. Even if your character doesn't undergo some sort of change, it just doesn't. It's never exactly the way you imagine it, and that's okay. And that's the same for GMs as well, especially with NPCs. NPCs are never going to turn out exactly the way you wanted them to, but it's very important to just go with it. It's the same way with pretty much anything you do as a GM. It's never going to go exactly the way you want it to, but that's not what everyone's here for. Everyone's not going to remember, oh man, the game sure did go exactly the way the GM wrote it. They're going to remember how the story was, and that's the important part. At the end of the day, that is the important part. So if you wanted some extra template sort of questions, I don't know what I'm doing with my hands. Great GM once told me, hey, there's 2 questions you can ask your NPCs. So if you're creating an NPC, you need a lot of them. You need to make them fast. You need name. You need what is their biggest strength, and what are they afraid other people finding out about them. So like a big secret. That works great for player characters too. So what's the strength, weakness, and something they're embarrassed about. That's really good, because that adds character. Oftentimes it's weaknesses, drawbacks, insecurities. These are the things that build a good foundation for a more interesting character. Doesn't have to mean an evil or mean character, but it is very good. And it does add complexity to an otherwise perhaps somewhat too unfallible character, whether they're good or bad. Those are just like important things to think about when creating a character, both for a GM and player. The 3 loops, they help a lot to get the good foundation of what it is you actually want to do. And I'm sure you can create a character without using them. I'm sure people have managed to do that in the past. But it's proved a good method for me to sort of structuring how I create the character, because it gives me a good method, good like tool to view how I'm gonna play it. I'm probably gonna create some characters I'm not super happy about with it as well, but it's worked out so far. So try using those loops when you create the character, and try imagining exactly how you're going to do in the short term, mid-term, and long term. And make sure it's within the scope of the game. It's within something that fits the game tone. So basically consult the GM on all 3 loops, because on the first loop, is this the tone of the game we're talking about? Like, is it going to be a very like Daredevil, edgy sort of urban kind of situation with like Curse of the Crimson Throne or something like that? Or is it going to be more, shall we say, lighthearted? it's important that that's kind of in line. I mean, oftentimes a good GM is probably gonna like fit with what the players are doing, but you might end up in a group with other players who aren't sort of on the same wavelength, and that's maybe not gonna be as fun for you. Of course, you can be the edgy one or the goofy one in a otherwise sort of contrasting world, which is fine, but you might not have as fun as you think with it. But I've been that guy on both sides of that, so it works. Just make sure it's not too much, because too much of that. Then again, I'm sure. I suppose you don't actually want 4 goofy characters or 4 edgy characters. So, I'm just thinking more the theme of the game and like the tone of the group is, if not the same, because that's boring, at least in line with each other. And also make sure, like, if the GM says no evil characters or perhaps no good characters, maybe you're doing sort of like the Star Wars thing we're doing with outlaws, not heroic characters, or maybe Shadowrun characters. Though Shadowrun is kind of anything goes, really, because based on the nature of the game, it's just kind of how it goes. And above all, consult your GM for the 3rd loop, because that's the most important one for them to sort of know, because that's how they bake it into the story. And a good GM will do that. A good GM will bake it into the story and sort of oftentimes take things they have made themselves and just sort of replace with what the players have written. And there you go. The players are now in the story, and the backstory is tied, and your notes aren't fucked. So that's good. And hey, you'll be surprised that players can help you build a lot, as long as you give them room to do it. Though I suppose I'm a player lecturing GMs now, so I dabble as a GM, and my player experience has helped me a lot with that. It's still very difficult. I think especially creating characters as a GM is really tough, because you have so many accents. I think it's hard to do one accent. GM's got a shotgun between all of them. Anyway, this video is dragging on, so that's the 3 loops. Try using them, and try using online templates to fill out the rest, and just get a good base understanding of your character before the first sessions, and then as the sessions progress, you'll get a better understanding of who they are, how they develop, and sort of what you want to do with it. What makes you feel comfortable in the group dynamic, and what makes you have the most fun in the game. So, good luck, have great games, and post in the comments if you have any characters you want to run through those loops. I'd be happy to hear it.